morning, YouTubers. Mike Martins here with the Mike Martins channel. Welcome to Morning Coffee with Mike. One topic, one discussion piece here I want to cover with you guys because it's extremely important. So here it is. Political violence related to COVID could lead to the unraveling of societies worldwide, observer says. This is a very important article, and it's by the CBC, which, in all fairness, is getting another government bailout. So the CBC is, I think it's in $1.2 billion. You see other places like RT, where it's state-run media, you see it everywhere, and they propagandize that here in the West. But isn't this now considered state-run controlled media? That's another video for another time. But anyways, which we've made already before. Now let's get into what is happening with political violence related to COVID. Now, if we go back on Mike in the Night, if you go back on to episodes, which people are still watching today, of Mike in the Night from 2019 and 2018, 2019 was the year of the protest. The entire, a good chunk of the world, all of South America, I think except Honduras, one country, was not protesting, but everybody else in South America was. Central America was seeing this uptick in violence and migrant trains. And then Mexico, you had this uncertainty of inflation and wages not keeping up with pay. And in those countries, unlike Canada, in Mexico, they actually really get violent, or stuff starts to really take off in countries like that. Canada, you weren't seeing too much, but you were seeing a lot of housing protests, like unfairness. I work 3 jobs and I can't pay my rent, and that was happening more in Canada. Then you had Hong Kong. Hong Kong, oh my God. Hong Kong was completely out of control. And for 50, I think they were in their 70th week or 60th week at the end of 2019. Then you had, France, the Gilets Jaunes. But then you had Hungary, you had Turkey, Israel, Lebanon, Syria. You had a lot of countries that were in heavy protest, okay, in 2019. 2020 comes, COVID, the shutdown. COVID miraculously sets up. We're allowed now to say that it is man-made. That's a big mistake the mainstream media did. The biggest mistake that social media did was allow us to say that this virus was man-made. So a man-made virus comes along and shuts down economies and shuts down the world. In due time, to the world unrest. And then 2020 hits. We're at the peak of the pandemic. And you have these BLM riots. You have all these riots. And then doctors on CNN are signing off saying over 1,000 doctors petitioned to let people go out and riot. That the virus, that it's okay. It's okay. So you're kind of starting to look at things. You see Canada, where all of 2020, you had Hong Kong bring in $46 billion that we caught into Canada, right? So it's kind of interesting what is happening and how it's happening, right? So now they're saying political violence related to COVID could lead to unraveling of societies worldwide, observer says. This was happening before COVID. So they're always going to announce COVID in it. COVID will always be the usual suspect because there's no way, right? Rock throwing crowds angry over government mishandling of the spike in COVID-19 cases. So a majority of this is actually happening because of forced inoculations. That's what it's for. But they're saying the mishandling of COVID cases triggered a dismissal of Tanzania's parliament this weekend in what opponents call a coup by the country's president. Could it be that the president was doing a terrible job and was actually, was he? I don't know if he was forcing forced inoculations, right? Amid the clouds of tear gas, demonstrators clashed with police in Paris on Saturday over proposed laws forcing healthcare workers to be inoculated, while thousands of freedom protesters filled the streets of Australia over a renewed lockdown. So Australia, we had Anna Key on the other day on the show. It's just terrible. She was in a shop, and then she had to, basically, she was talking to the shop owner, and the police came in and warned the shop owner not to talk to his clients. From South Africa to Cuba, Haiti, Lebanon, again, these are all the same usual suspects in 2019, right? We are seeing some of the biggest riots, protests, and challenges of governments in decades, and many seem to be sparked by economic, social impacts of COVID and government attempts to contain it. Again, government attempts to contain what? The New York Post has come out miraculously on their front page. New York Times, or I think it was the New York Times. What's all the fuss about? Look at the science. Look who's dying. And like, wow, the mainstream media is actually coming with this? Wow. COVID has exposed the underlying fault lines of anxiety and distrust around the world. Again, people are blaming the mistrust in governments on COVID, right? So there was an article that was posted by a mainstream media source that people are fleeing Cuba to get the vax. And they took that article immediately down because that was a major deal, right? If you've got unemployed, inequality, and failure of government to make sure that everyone is covered, so that you're going under now a more of a communist system where everybody is taken care of, right? And then more broadly, a failure of global government to make sure that make sure that every country has the vaccine and every citizen has the vaccine. So they're flipping the script and kind of saying that they're basically saying that the people, they're flipping this and saying that the people want to be, they're not handling the vaccinations properly. And this is the problem that's happening. And a lot of these mainstream media outlets are failing. It's because they're no longer telling people. I think it's the New York Times that posted. You could check the article this morning on what they're posting. It's actually very interesting. Much of the world is already witnessing it. Global data collected, U.S. nonprofit that tracks the conflict and unrest showed a typical violence 49% of countries last year. But they're forgetting 2019 was worse because the man-made virus was released in 2020. So they're forgetting that. And 2021 2021 end is going to be, they're going to start blaming the unvaxxed for causing this problem. You know what I'm saying? After a brief dip in demonstrations earlier days of the pandemic, they're admitting that there was a brief dip in demonstrations in the early days of the pandemic, as fear, distancing kept people apart. Protests rose 7% in 2020, and that's through the United States when doctors were on CNN telling them, go ahead and riot, it's okay. That's not just a dispute, but because part of the pandemic, ACELED concluded it affected 58% of countries, the highest number in years. Then it goes on to say that the group's researcher also found that the state repression internationally increased since the arrival of COVID from Hungary to Hong Kong and beyond. Governments used the unique cover of the pandemic to impose restrictions amid consolidating authority, a means to stifle opposition and limit any challenge to power, ACLED said. So this is not just the governments on the hook, it's a lot of the public sector workers who will never work for the private sector again. And that's becoming a major issue too. So people are starting to say, I'm going to say I delivered newspapers or I did something else, right? In South Africa this month, the challenge of the government's power came from the streets. It was sparked by the jailing of former South African President Jacob Zuma, who was on trial for corruption. Now, here's the problem with this, right? So, there's a lot that's going on, and the underlying factor is not being... The underlying factor, the true factor of the problem, and that is mistrust and losing confidence in governments is happening. So when that happens, when that happens and they blame something else, it doesn't solve the problem. It makes it worse in the future. But more than a week of rioting and looting, the most violent the country had seen in decades, was the pandemic has pushed unemployment beyond 30%. Now they're blaming the pandemic, right? So the economic suffering and the lack of jobs, income earning opportunities, that's part of the pandemic in South Africa. And vaccine defects So the fact that South Africa, like African countries, has been struggling to get enough vaccines hasn't helped. No, they have the vaccines. A lot of people just don't want to. Some of the most populous countries on the continent, Nigeria, Ethiopia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo and Algeria, have a vaccination rate of 2 doses for every 100 people at best. In South Africa, the number is 12%. The virus is surging across much of the continent, 1.2 billion people, as a third wave of infections. Again, they're going into the third wave thing, and no one's asking what happened to the flu. Where is the flu? We've been tracking flu cases and flu numbers since pretty much the turn of the 20th century, and why aren't we not tracking the flu cases anymore, right? Because if you look at them, they're less than 50 per country, 60 per country, right? So, unrest in the West. Developed countries have not avoided the waves of unrest. In the United States, a group called the ACLED has tracked and decreases in the frequency of protests, including the sweeping of Black Lives Matter movement. Remarkably, the numbers of mimics spiked in the valleys of U.S. infection rates throughout 2020. That includes the violent attack on U.S. Capitol. Again, they're going into they basically, the media is the false prophet. The mainstream media is the false prophet. They're not telling you how it is. You go back on episodes of Mike in the Night from 2019. There is an episode in July of 2019 where I'm on the phone with the Raven. And basically I say to the Raven, and Raven says to me, so what do they have left? I go, the only thing they have left now is to pull the trigger on a mass pandemic. That's the only thing they have left. I said that word for word. And he's like, okay. That's a big one, but yeah, sure. And look where we are today in 2021. Now they're going to start blaming the vaxxed. They're going to be blaming, we said this 6 months ago, they're going to start blaming the unvaxxed on the vax. But if you're vaccinated, what does it matter if you're vaccinated? It's your body, your choice. Or does your body, your choice mean when you want to change genders or the anatomy of your body? Is that how it only works? Or you want to go and have an abortion, right? But how come it doesn't matter, So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Is this misinformation I'm spreading? I've been getting put in my place by landscapers, pet groomers, mechanics, putting me in my place and telling me how it is. Telling me, they're all virologists, they're climate experts. These people are basically educated by the mainstream media. Why is the CBC going in $1.2 billion? It is state-run controlled media, right? So they're going to have to find a way to spin this. They tried spinning this garbage on different fronts, right? So let's see where this goes. Let's see how this ends up. Guys, don't forget to set your reminders for Mike in the Night this Saturday. It's going to be a good one. We're entering the dark days. How long are these dark days going? A couple of professionals told me that I've spoken around the world that are following things legitimately, that have been deplatformed or removed from speaking, have been saying basically we're looking at about 200 days of cleanup. So it's going to be interesting times ahead, guys. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think. Thanks for being part of this. I hope you're having coffee this morning. I'm going to make my coffee right now. I think I'm going to go with Maxwell House this morning because of those nice crystal blends. Anyways, I love you guys. Be good, okay? Stay strong. Mike Martin's here. I have spoken.